Welcome, listeners, to www.ironradio.org, the website and podcast for all things strength sports and sports nutrition. With your hosts, Lonnie Lowry.
Remember, Phil is like a gnarled old oak tree held together with scar tissue and bone spurs.
Rob Fortney.
And I'm telling you, the pain that I would suffer was beyond excruciating.
And Phil Stevens.
Just do it, Rob. You'll kill all those nerves.
Thanks for listening.
Welcome, Iron Radio listeners. This is Lonnie Lowry. I'm an exercise physiology and sports nutrition professor of about 20 years, and I'm a former competitive bodybuilder.
This is Phil Stevens. I run Strength Guild. I'm a strength coach. I also compete in powerlifting Highland Games.
Hey, this is Dr. Mike T. Nelson, creator of the Flex Diet certification, faculty member at the Keurig Institute, Rocky Mountain University, a bunch of other places, and I'm actually at home for the second week in a row.
Oh, my God.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I was actually in Kansas City recently, but close enough.
Yeah. Okay. We have some listener mail and 2 bits of news. Before we get to our topic of the day, we're going to discuss accessory or assistance movements for the top 3 power lifts, if you will, and get these guys' preferences and why and that sort of thing. Revisit, basically, assistance work. Let me start with a shout-out to Matthew. Matthew is an Iron Radio supporter, and he doesn't use PayPal or anything like that, but he really went out of his way, basically, to send us some funds. So thank you, Matthew. That's appreciated, especially the extra effort. So keeping the lights on.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's see. Nathan writes in, and this is sort of a multi-parter here. So he says, first, let me just say that Iron Radio is a gold mine for the egghead/meathead misfits like myself. What you all do for the bodybuilding and strength sport community is nothing short of astounding, and I just wanted to thank you all for your hard work. I had a couple of questions that came up while listening to the latest podcast this morning, and I thought I would shoot them by you in case they sounded like something you might want to talk about on air. Number 1, and this is something that I think is relevant to both you guys, not so much to me. With online coaching continuing to grow in popularity, I can't help but feel that it waters down the title of coach, quote unquote, particularly for powerlifting and other strength sports. To me, true coaching is being there in person, correcting form, loads, reps, set adjustments, motivating the lifter in real time. I just don't see how, even with the best online coach, you could get anything close to the same benefit as having a half-decent coach in person. Can online coaching for strength sports be done effectively, or do you feel it inherently detracts from the work done by in-the-trenches coaches? I'd really like to hear Phil's opinion on this one, especially. Let's stop right there, and then let's answer that one. So, Phil, what do you think?
Yeah. Well, I got a fun one on this. I coached Brian Hartzell, who became the 5th man ever to deadlift and squat 900 in the same meet, and I do it at a distance.
Okay.
I'd say it's effective.
900 pounds of effective.
Yeah, or it could be. I mean, of course, there's differences. I myself only take on people that are fairly experienced at a distance. So competitors that aren't just. I generally don't take on new people that have lots of problems at a distance that aren't willing to come in and fix those problems. So in person. If we have little tweaks and things we need to do here and there, that's fairly easy to do at a distance. And like Brian will drive up, like he's coming up today. Every few months he'll be here, and we can work on little things. But yeah, I mean, it can be effective depending on the person. So
that sounds almost like a hybrid.
And I also, I gave up being like a raw pencil pusher or pin pusher trainer a long time ago. I generally don't take on people that need. I don't have much patience for people that need me to be their influence to train hard.
Oh, right. Sense. Yes, totally.
People don't come to my facility for me to yell at them and scream at them and tell them, get off your ass and work. No, I got people in there that want to train. So that's generally who gravitates towards me. So, and we kind of pick each other up. But yeah, it can be effective depending on the person. I mean, if you're a self-starter and your form's fairly good, and so Brian will put up videos every day of his stuff, and I can talk to him about it and still kick some ass. So
right. No, that makes sense. There's actually a trainer at my gym, a bodybuilder guy, and this isn't very charitable of me, but he's the cheerleader type personal trainer. Come on, bro, lightweight, whoop, stuff like that. And it's like, well, yeah, but as far as Nathan's comment about like sort of maybe cheapening what a coach is, the cheerleader type personal trainer stuff, I feel like that's like an 80s thing. Like, can we move beyond this and do stuff like, I imagine what you're doing, Phil, is assessing videos, talking about different accessory movements or progression models in the main movements, or and then let them handle the motivation and not just feel like you're babysitting and cheerleading.
Yes.
So, Mike, I mean, you're online most of the time, aren't you? I mean, this is kind of your main deal. So, how do you feel about this as far as, is it real coaching and how it compares?
I think it's just different. I mean, I think, like Phil said, it depends on the level of the lifter. Like, not so much recently, but a couple of years ago, I turned away a fair amount of people who were, I'd say, more beginners, and just said, hey, you need to do at least a couple sessions with the trainer to get, your form down if you've never deadlifted and you haven't done any of these exercises before. Online's not going to work so well for you. You need some in-person help, someone to at least show you the basics of the lift, and if you can be there with them more often, all the better. Once you've got kind of the, most of the people I work with, they're all pretty, good at doing all the lifts. There might be a few tweaks here and there, but it's nothing like, massive. They've got a lot of experience doing them. It's usually more, for them, just a coordination of everything. The training, the nutrition, the mobility, lifestyle, stress, all that kind of stuff. And for quite a while, I actually didn't do online training. I started out years ago, probably jumping to online training too soon. And I didn't realize how bad people could screw exercises up. Because I was beating my head against the wall going, why isn't any of this working? And, back 10 years ago, there wasn't, as easy to get videos as it is now. Mm-hmm. I got some videos, I'm looking at them, I'm like horrified. I'm like, oh my God, I never thought it would look that bad. So mm-hmm. I literally stopped doing it. I'm like, oh my God, I'm doing these people a disservice. I actually did more in-person training, and part of it was my own fault because I didn't have enough experience of how people could screw stuff up. And then probably I started again 7-ish years ago, and I said I'm not going to do online training until I can find a way to quantify each one of these, right? What are your biomechanics through different tests and videos? What is the state of your autonomic nervous system using HRV? What is your nutrition? I had this checklist of stuff that I had to be able to quantify before I did online training again. So I think if you're a more advanced lifter, I think it can be super useful, because a lot of the programs I saw people following, I'd say, were less than ideal. And I think that's probably the main benefit of it. And I don't think it's cheapens the title of a coach or anything like that. I just think it's different. And I do have a handful of people that are kind of hybrids. They'll drop in here like once a month, and the rest of it is all online, or people come in from out of town and we'll spend half a day together and do some stuff, and then we'll follow up online. So I think there's different ways you can get around it. But if you're new, it's definitely worth your money to find a really good coach, find a good environment, get really solid at the basic lifts, and then go from there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like it'd be valuable if we could only have a network of people across the country, and I guess that's why there's different certifications and whatnot, but like if someone teaches someone how to do major lifts and they do it badly, I think about what Phil said, I think last week, oh my God, how do you unlearn that? We were talking about athleticism, right? And about how if you have an athletic client, you just feel like you can get ahead so much more quickly. Because if somebody comes to you with quote-unquote lifting experience, they've learned these lifts, quote-unquote learned, then you're like, oh, God, that's not how you do that. Your form really sucks. That's not even a squat, kind of thing. But, yeah, I can see how it's different. And you know what? The only input I have on that is I can tell you that whether it's dietetics or other things, there are attempts from different professional groups to try to create some kind of standards of practice for online and distance, right? And because you have to think about state laws. I mean, think about with something like nutrition is laws differ from state to state. So can I give nutrition advice here if I don't have a license there? You know, there's a lot of these kinds of issues that the internet is just being disruptive in that way. And we're just going to have to get our heads around it. I like what both you guys said about the hybrid thing. You know, it's the same thing with online teaching, like academics. Ideally, it'd be nice to have a hybrid approach where you do a lot of the didactic book learning stuff. And then, I don't know, a week out of the semester or something, you come actually get in the lab or work with a client or you do something hands-on. That would be sort of ideal kind of thing. But.
Yeah, and that's when obviously I teach for the Carrick Institute, so when we designed the human performance course, you know, that's exactly what we did. So for each module, all the stuff you need to learn is online, and then you've got 3 days of, you know, partial lecture and a lot of doing stuff. You know, and Kenneth J taught the aerobic portion. I think we did 7 max aerobic tests in 3 days.
Wow.
So it's pretty brutal, but you also get, I think, that live experience and that hands-on, which can easily get lost, especially doing exercise and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, Nathan, I hope that helps a little. Yeah, I can see how it'd be much easier if you work with an experienced competitor who has a little bit of body awareness and you've got some video or biometrics to be able to discuss what's going on instead of, try to build from zero. Next up from Nathan is the question, number 2. With Iron Radio just celebrating episode 520, I can't help but wonder about all the changes along the way in the lives of the hosts. For example, by the time I started listening, Lonnie, you had retired from competition and Phil had already had his hip replacement. However, I feel like there was a whole other world that occurred before that. To be quite frank, I just don't have the time to dig back and listen to all of those episodes in full. That said, I think it'd be really cool and insightful for me and others that are newer listeners to do a walk through the past episode, starting at the beginning and sort of summarizing each year along the way, what was going on in the hosts' lives, notable episodes worth checking out, etc. I just think it'd be really cool. Thanks again for everything you do. Looking forward to another 10 years. Best, Nathan. Nathan's a research engineer, so I'm not surprised he likes the science stuff. Well, Nathan, just like you can't, I think, listen through all that backlog, we actually can't even go, even year by year. We'd have to do 10, it would take multiple episodes just to do an annual review.
I have people come up to me like, do you remember episode 221 you talked about? No, I don't.
Not at all.
I really don't.
It's just too much, there's just too many. However, point well taken. We did do a retrospective at the beginning of this year, Nathan. So just a couple episodes back when we started 2019, and I actually shared a few audio clips and stuff like that. So we did a retro type of thing. But there's no doubt. I mean, in fact, Phil and I were discussing it in that episode, that kind of retrospective about how we've changed over the years. We've had different jobs. I've taught at different universities, surgeries. I mean, you can just
lots of surgeries.
Go down the list. Yeah, so it's probably clever of Nathan to, want some type of chronological thing because, I mean, if you just had a surgery, we're going to be talking about different stuff for a while. You're not going to be talking about ramping up for a meet because you just got stitched together with some additional titanium and whatnot. So yeah, that does affect a lot of this kind of stuff. So I some of the episodes that we were recording when I did that last round of competing myself, those are some eye-opening weird ones about my experiences backstage and stuff, because I'm looking at some of this stuff like almost like a sociologist or an anthropologist or something, like, oh my God, some of this seems kind of weird and deviant, and that's interesting, or, oh, how do you do that? So I'm like poking around and asking people stuff, and it was quite different, yeah. So I all I can really say is go back through. We do have archives at ironradio.org. They're quarterly. So they're every 10 episodes, and just browse around, or even Google Google search rather, Iron Radio, and then type in almost any topic, and I think you're going to find it. So anyway, so that's fun stuff, though. All right, 2 bits of news before we get to our topic of the day.
Strength and muscle sport news.
This is brand new, May of this year. Why you love coffee and beer. This is from Northwestern University.
Wow, they know me.
Yeah, they know us all, I think. Why do you swig bitter dark roast coffee when others like sweet cola? It says, to scientists' surprise, a recent study showed that taste preferences for bitter versus sweet beverages aren't based on variations in our taste genes, but rather genes related to the psychoactive properties of these beverages. So that's interesting. I think they went into this probably thinking this is going to be almost like a taste bud, some kind of taste gene thing, and it wasn't, essentially. Scientist Marilyn Cornelis searched for variations in our taste genes that could explain our beverage preferences, because understanding these preferences could indicate ways we might intervene with people's diets, right? Why someone has a sweet tooth, for example. And Mike, I'm sure you've worked with clients before. Maybe that's a bigger problem than with others. Somebody just smashes a chocolate cake. You're like, okay, we can't do that. And then other people may not want that at all. They want to eat beef jerky snacks or something,
Potato chips.
Chips, yeah, savory stuff. The genetics underlying our preferences are related to the psychoactive components of these drinks, says Cornelis, assistant professor of preventive medicine at Northwest University Feinberg School of Medicine. People like the way coffee and alcohol make them feel. That's why they drink it. It's not the taste. And this paper appeared in Human Molecular Genetics. Cornelis did find one variant in a gene called FTO that was linked to sugar-sweetened drinks, but it was sort of weird and surprising that particular gene variant would be related to SSB, right, sugar-sweetened beverage consumption, because it was previously related to lower risk of obesity. And so that seems counterintuitive, that the same gene that might be related to more sugary drinks was related to lower obesity. So I think they're still trying to tease some of this stuff out. Essentially, they did 24-hour dietary recalls or diet questionnaires. Then they counted the number of servings of bitter versus sweet beverages, right? And then they compared it to, 336,000 individuals in the UK Biobank. So they must have genomic information there. And they're just looking for correlations in this kind of stuff. I went to the related paper here, Genome-Wide Association Study of Bitter and Sweet Beverage Consumption by Zhong, Z-H-O-N-G. And again, Cornelis is the senior author on this one. It says, except for drinking water, most beverages taste bitter or sweet. So they dug into, genetic relationships with this. Sweet beverages included artificially and sugar-sweetened beverages and non-grapefruit juice. Because, of course, grapefruit juice is not very sweet by itself. They say in the abstract here from the journal itself, our study suggests genetic variants related to alcohol consumption, coffee consumption, and obesity were primary genetic determinants of bitter and sweet beverage consumption. So I think the take home here is it's not just about the taste, it's about how it makes you feel. And I could certainly identify with that with coffee. I think I like the bitter taste of coffee, but it's probably also the fact that it's sort of security blanket's not the right word. I mean, I don't feel nervous when I speak usually, but I like to have a hot coffee in my hand, and sip it when I'm teaching or whatnot. Or I'm sure it's got something to do with the way I feel. So
yeah, well, look at how often. Decaf is not a real popular seller overall. So
true. Yeah.
You could argue that it doesn't taste as good either most of the time, but yeah,
that's true. Absolutely. One other little tidbit here before we go to break. The new Canadian Food Guide is out. So for some of our Canadian listeners, they're probably like, duh, Lowry, but here it is. What surprised me, and I heard some dietitians talking about this, is there's no dairy group anymore. They say drink water. I find that quite interesting. So they have a plate diagram, like a little infographic kind of thingy, like we do now with myplate.gov. Like the pyramids are gone, folks, right? Pyramids are gone. And thank goodness. The early stage ones were really quite good. They were geometrically clever, the big base, a little at the top, to avoid at the top. But then they started vertical lines and all this stuff. And, I mean, there are different food guides from around the world. Canada had a rainbow for a while. But anyway, their new one, Canada's Food Guide, it shows a plate. Half the plate is fruit and veg. A quarter of it is essentially whole grains. And then a quarter of it says eat protein foods. So good on them. So it shows eggs, meat, beans, all kinds of protein foods. And then the little cup that's next to the plate, it just says make water your drink of choice. Now, down here in the States, I think the politics of this from the food industry would be too heavy. I mean, we could barely even add something to food labels about added sugars, but try to remove dairy or meat, and you're going to watch these, like the Cattle Growers Association or the Dairy Council, they're going to come out of the woodwork and be like, whoa. I thought I would just offer this. One of the reasons, because some people are really quite down on milk. There's the odd study that casein might worsen prostate cancer risk. Or, I've actually had a student once say, why would anybody drink cow's milk? We're like, we're the only species that drinks another species' milk and all that sort of thing. Well, the reason is whey and casein are very high-quality proteins. It's got potassium, vitamin A and D, right, fortified. There's not much vitamin D in the diet. So, I mean, and I've talked to vegetarians and they're like, well, I'll just get it with broccoli, my calcium, for example. Well, I hope you really like broccoli. I've said it before.
Broccoli, bro.
Yeah, here's your bucket of broccoli to get your 400 milligrams that you would have got in that little tiny yogurt. So, removing the milk is very controversial. Some of their phrases here that go with this plate make sense for the most part, although they are a little bit loaded if you want to be hypercritical. One is be mindful of your eating habits. That's a good one. Another one is cook more often. That's probably also a good one for the most part. Enjoy your food. Eat meals with others. And I think the idea there is if you could sit around a table and actually eat, maybe you won't just shovel chili cheese fries, in a hurry kind of thing. Use food labels. Limit foods high in sodium, sugar, or saturated fat. And then lastly, be aware of food marketing. So that's the new Canadian Food Guide. I don't know, listeners, send an email if you're curious about anything else about this. Yeah, dropping dairy I thought was pretty controversial because it's going to be hard to get some of those nutrients otherwise. So we'll see. Okay. Let's go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk about accessory lifts and how Phil and Mike go about it in general. So we'll be back. Hey listeners, this is Dr. Lonnie Lowry. If you've ever had anyone critique you on your protein intake as part of your weightlifting lifestyle. Oh, you poor meathead. All that extra protein is going to rot your kidneys or weaken your bones or dehydrate you or give you gout or who knows what. There is a book available. You could simply Google CRC Press and Lowry. And what I've done is reach out to experts all over the world and create a book, a single compendium that you can hold up and say, this is why I consume extra protein. This can be very valuable when you're being quote-unquote educated by various professionals on the topic. There's an enormous amount of literature in this book on the safety, the effectiveness, how protein works in cells, the history of protein and weight trainers, much more. So again, please check out CRC Press and Protein and Lowry. You can just Google that. And I do, full disclosure, I do make a small single-digit royalty on the book. But that's not why I did it. I did it so we can all have something, our particular population, to both defend what we do and to inform our nutrition and our eating. Thanks. IronRadio is, of course, primarily a podcast. But over the years, there have been technical glitches calling for backup streaming, and listeners who wanted the convenience of other sources of audio content. Toward this end, Iron Radio is now simulcast and backed up on YouTube. If needed, please search Lawnman07 or Iron Radio from within YouTube. There's not much video, but if you like to listen through YouTube on a Roku or other living room device, there you go.
Like your weekly fix of Iron Radio? In addition to being a popular institute on iTunes, we are also on email. Simply go to www.ironradio.org and sign up for the voluntary email. You'll get a once per week email, no more. That's little more than the show notes and a link to the audio. So go for it.
All right, folks, we're back. It's Mike and Phil and Lonnie, and we're going to talk about accessory work or assistance work. In fact, let's start with that, Phil. Do you say accessory work or assistance work or both?
Usually assistance work.
Assistance. Okay.
I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah. I didn't know if there was a proper, terminology there. What do you call it, Mike? Either?
Either. Yeah, I probably flip-flop back and forth and use both.
Because I just realized I was doing that. That's why I thought I'd ask.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's revisit some of this. We've talked about this sort of thing before. To me, what's most curious is, like, what percentage of your total effort, is accessory work versus the big three lifts and that kind of thing. But we'll get to that. Let's start with top 2 accessory movements or assistance type movements for the big 3 lifts, Phil. So like bench, squat, deadlift. Oh. Let's start with the bench. Like, what do you like if you had to pick 2? And I know this is not what you would do, right? But if you had to pick 2 that would really support someone's bench, let's say.
Well, I'd say probably the most neglected from people would be lots of upper back work.
Okay.
People don't think about it, but you need a big upper back to have a big bench. You need to have that supporting tissue. And a lot of people neglect that. And, by hitting like heavy bent over rows a lot, things like that, you can actually up your bench. So that'd be one. And then, I like pressing overhead.
I thought you might include that,
yeah, I think that's neglected a lot in the powerlifting community. And I've seen it time and time again when I take somebody that's even a fairly good bencher and they have neglected pressing overhead. And we end up getting their shoulders a lot stronger and their bench goes up.
Yep. And, I think also you mentioned upper back. That's one of the things I like about just freestanding military presses, overhead pressing is it does involve your upper back. Like you do some heavy work like that and you're like, oh, my whole upper back is sore.
Yeah.
It's not like a deltoid isolation movement or upper chest or something.
Yeah.
Before we move on, how about you, Mike? What do you like? Now, not odd lifts, because you have a massive repertoire. But, like something that you would really hone in on. You had somebody say, help me, with my powerlifting and what's, bench accessory movement.
Yeah, I'd say one of my favorites now, which actually is a little bit more in the health area, is especially if they're weak at the bottom on a pause. So if you see their lift just drop into the basement when they have to do a pause, I'll put the pins on there and have them get into a bench position and then just do dead stops from the bottom. There's an Australian study, I think, showing that it took up to maybe even 5 seconds to eliminate the stretch shortening cycling effect. So I'll have them start at the bottom if they can. So lower it down, set it on the pins, so it should be right at chest level, and then wait for 3 to 5 seconds and then press up. So do reps from there. And if you want to do an interesting mobility challenge, you can have them put their feet up on the bench, so flatten their low back. So you're basically taking out any arch specifically. And then you can play around and use like back grips or use an axle or something too for variety. But so that's one of my new favorites. And then I think another thing that I played around with lately with some clients and myself is just a crap load of tricep work. I noticed when I don't train bench or even dumbbell bench press, like just feels like my triceps get weaker a lot faster. I don't know if that's just me. So with some clients, I actually started adding just accessory tricep work, 2-3 times a week, dips, overhead work, presses, things of that nature, and doesn't seem to mess with their recovery, and so far seems to help.
Now, you say dips and overhead presses, so still compound movements, not like direct arm work?
Yeah, I'll do both. So I'll do like 1 or 2. So right now I've been doing a rotation of dips, light overhead pressing, and then an isolation, like a tricep press down. So
Okay.
I'll just kind of toss those into their program in addition to what they were normally doing.
What about for our more beginner type people? You're talking about pins, and can you explain exactly what you meant with your first, like, working out of the rack, I'm presuming here?
Yeah, so if you don't have access to a rack, obviously you can use a spotter and just hold the weight at your chest level for an extended period of time. So when you do a normal rep, if you're not having a pause, if you lower it, right, we're stretching some of the muscle, but we're primarily putting energy into the ligaments and tendons and that soft tissue, right? You're stretching the rubber band, and then when you let go, you get some kind of elastic return from it. So what we're trying to do is eliminate that as much as we can. So when you're pausing at the bottom, that energy you put in to kind of stretch some of that tissue, it kind of goes back to normal over the series of about 5 seconds. So that when you press it back up, you're using more of the muscle per se and less of the soft tissue on it. So especially if someone is, usually you'll see people in the gym, you'll see them come down and about, if you watch the rep speed, that last third of the movement is just like a drop and kind of a bounce off their chest back up to that third movement again, and then finishing the rep. So that usually tells me that that bottom portion they're very weak in. If they go into a competition where they're going to have to do a controlled pause on their chest, their lifts are going to be substantially lower. So you're basically trying to over-accentuate that pause to work on that weakness.
Right on. Yeah, I like the idea of manipulating, like, the pause, the explode out of the hole. I mean, it's cadence and other things. It's not just movement selection.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and a lot of times you'll see them just get really uncomfortable in that position too. So part of it is just, more practice in a weaker position.
When we're talking about strength arcs like this, this is just making me think of something tangential, but since we're still on the bench, Phil, what about, do you ever use chains and bands and stuff for this kind of stuff?
Yeah, we'll do some banded work. I do some banded work quite a bit at the gym, and it just depends on where people are weak at. That's the hard part about answering this is for who.
Yeah.
So we've got to identify who's this for and what are their issues. So I have some people that are weak at lockout, some people are weak off the bottom. So there's some people that are just generally weak. So
yeah.
But yeah, we'll use some banded work sometimes, and even some like slingshot work, things like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it just goes all over the place.
Right on. Let's move on to the squat, Phil. Top 2 accessory approaches, right? Movements or whatever for squat.
Good mornings and heavy loaded carries.
Okay.
Would be my 2. Good mornings. Generally, people are not. Generally, the average population is not weak in their quads. They're weak in their posterior chain, and usually on a squat, from what I've seen, it's their hamstrings or their thoracic spine giving up. So, the good mornings can help that. We're purposely putting you in a disadvantageous position by having you bend over at the hip with a lot of weight on your shoulders. So, and you have to keep your spine in a certain position. And at the same time, your hamstring is now the primary mover. And then loaded carries, I haven't found a better way to get people in the correct position that we want them to in a squat than put weight on their back and make them walk. All of a sudden, you don't have a tilt to your pelvis and things like that. It'll come back under you. You can't be in a weird pelvic tilt and walk at the same time. So we get you loaded with heavy carries, and it's also a great way to strengthen your core. So probably the best that I've seen.
Just to clarify, I know this is hard to do with audio, but so you literally just mean a loaded barbell on your traps.
Yeah, or a yoke. Like we use the
Like a
yoke a
yoke
lot.
walk?
The yoke walk or farmer's walks. You know, if you have somebody that has, you know, they tilt their pelvis a lot in squat, we can retrain that just with loaded carries. You know, it gets them to load the bar and it gets their hips back under them.
Yeah.
Because, like I said, you can't stick your ass out and walk at the same time. So
Right.
it just doesn't work.
So it corrects it.
That gets their hips reprogrammed to where they need to be when they're standing with a bar.
Yeah.
And it also just there's a massive core strengthening to it. So
Yeah.
and get you used to heavier weights. Generally, you can stroll along with a heavier weight than you can sit down and stand up with. So you get used to heavy weight on your back and things like that.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I asked partly because not everybody's going to have access to a yoke, I think, and the the
you can
space
use a
and-
heavy bar. I mean, I probably wouldn't walk too far.
right.
I wouldn't walk too far away from where you have to put it back. But,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, you can do it.
Okay. Mike, top 2 accessory movements to help with a squat.
Yeah, I'd say the oddball one. I'd say if you can do a Zercher lift, that's probably pretty good, but that's an oddball one. I'd say more common ones. I actually am a big fan of lunges. I know that it's probably, I don't think, going to transfer super well to like a max load, but I like the, you know, especially lunging forward and pushing back to start. So trying to absorb some force, trying to redirect it. And people haven't done those for a while, even just pretty strong people with body weight, like your hamstrings and glutes can be pretty sore from just doing that if you haven't done them in a while. And then I like doing them to slightly different angles. And I think that's probably more of a joint health, soft tissue component as just some lighter accessory work. And you normally don't have to go super heavy on them either. So you're kind of limiting a little bit of the spinal axial loading also. I would probably also agree. I had written down farmer's walks with Phil, that if you're trying to make, especially if you're thoracic and upper body, quote unquote, and core is kind of the weak part of your squat, then just grabbing weight and walking for a distance is really, really good. And if you don't have farmer's bars, you don't have a trap bar, you can do them a Zercher style. So just hold the heavyish barbell in the crooks of your elbows, or put some fat grips or a towel on it if it's, you know, just destroying your forearms. And you don't need a lot of weight to start with that, and then just walk. I mean, the amount of, you know, core, as much as I hate that word, stabilization and upper body work just to hold it there and move is much higher than you would think.
Okay. Deadlift, Phil. 2 favorites?
See, all my stuff rolls downhill. It rolls downhill just like my training. Like I do lunges and stuff too. It's just generally how we do it is like main move, some other primary moves that are like it. Then we move on to smaller stuff.
Right. Yes.
Gosh. Stiff-legged deadlifts, I don't have anybody not do them. I just think they're a great move. They're the one deadlift that I will do in high reps. I won't do like a regular deadlift much over 5s, but stiff-legged deadlifts we will. And gosh, back to your rowing or yeah, I'll just stick with rowing. Heavy rows, man, because again, you need everything goes back to your back with me on all these moves. You know,
Yeah.
And we've talked about it before. You can ID a good power lifter, like somebody who's been in it a long time, just because their back is massive. And for every one of the lifts, you need to have a strong back. So some heavy bent over rows.
I love it. I mean, some of what you're saying, you can say it's accessory work, but to a bodybuilder, heavy bent rows, that's a meat and potatoes lift, you know, because of what you just said. I mean, it builds your back like crazy.
Yeah.
So, Mike, how about you with deadlift? What might you do as accessory or assistance?
Yeah, I mean, obviously my biggest one is going to be other deadlifts, but you know that's
Yeah, exactly.
that's an accessory one, per se. But yeah, kind of with Phil, I do love RDLs. I think are great. I had written down pen lay rows, right? So a bent over row where you kind of start at the bottom each time, because what I found, if people do bent over rows, they tend to transform into some weird upright shrug thing. Or if we force them to start the barbell on the ground each time, that starting position is the same. You're working a little bit more on concentric force there, so just pulling it back up. I tend to like to do them with a fairly bent over torso, which is probably a little bit different. Another accessory one with that, again, it's kind of an oddball lift, but people have access to it, is bent over plate rows. So take like a 45-pound plate, or you can add 2 of them on there. Slip your hands underneath with your thumbs on the side, and then just row towards you. And obviously, this is going to be for higher reps. The nice part about that is that it's a different position that you don't normally get in with your hands wider, and that usually is pretty good for upper back, lats, that type of thing. Last thing I would add, too, that a lot of people forget is just any type of supportive grip. I see a lot of people all test their mixed grip pull versus their double overhand pull, and if there's a huge difference, I know that just by working on some specific grip work that their lift is probably going to go up. I mean, even if they're allowed to use straps in competition, things of that nature, and everybody's had the experience, right? So if you go and you just hold the grip the bar, you're like, oh yeah, today's going to be a good day, and everything just feels lighter. It just seems like the more secure your connection is to that implement, like all your lifts tend to go up.
Yeah. That reminds me of Fortress used to bark at me about that kind of stuff when we were doing specific strength work, right? Which he'd be like, squeeze the shit out of that bar, Lonnie, and just to try to feel that, like, you're right. It does send a message to your whole body. Like, I'm really connected. This feels right. It's moving right. I don't know. I feel stronger. And I'm sure there's a priming of the nervous system thing, and Mike, you'd be way better at describing this than I am, but it's like the jaw clench thing almost, like how much of this is just telling my nervous system it's go time just by squeezing.
Well, yeah, and it's just a funny thing with grip. It's like your body, people don't realize this, but your body will only pull like a deadlift as strong as your grip.
Yeah.
It'll literally shut you down where you'll make a lift look really hard, then you give somebody a grip aid and they kill it.
Yeah.
It's because it's slipping out of their hands and their body's like, it just won't let them pull harder. But yeah, I think grip's big. I mean, that's the only time I address that is with issues like Brian when he first started with me. He had no grip because he had trained his whole life with straps.
Oh,
so basically we had to move him away from straps and build his grip up over, because he was ready to, he could pull 900 off the floor with straps, but he couldn't hold it. So we had to attack that. So lots of just standing, holding a bar, things like that. I mean, that's one of the ones I've seen work. Farmers or just like set bar and rack, stand up, hold, and just sit there and hold for time, because people don't realize, people will buy grippers and things like that. It's different. It's not the same.
Grippers don't transfer.
Like my gripper strength is crap, but my ability to hang on to something and just hold it is it greatly exceeds my ability to lift. So my crushing strength is not that great, but it's just never been a high priority.
Let me clarify then, Mike. Since you actually done grip competitions and stuff. I mean, is a hook grip a form of cheating?
I just think it's different. Because you're trapping the thumb there, so you get a lot more friction. And if people do that, I think that definitely can work. But vast majority of people are going to need to practice that with very light weight, because
it hurts.
I keep trying to do it and I go away from it because it just freaking hurts. And I don't know, maybe I'm too much of a pussy and stop. But when I'm doing grip competitions, I can't use the hook grip, so it's not. For what I do is not super specific, with the exception of maybe a couple lifts. But I don't know, I think it's an option. I mean, I would rather have people go to a 2-inch axle or just buy some of the blue fat grips and go to a 2-inch diameter and do that for some accessory work. That tends to transfer really well. And if you want to teach them the importance of grip, like Phil said, I'll put those on a bar, have them do double overhand. And it's crazy to try to lift something you can't hold on to. Like, you can't move your body.
It just won't let you pull.
Bizarre. Like, your hips don't even come up early. It's like you can't. It's a bizarre thing that I think everyone should try at least once. And then you have the inverse of that when everything feels strong. You're like, oh, yeah, it's a lot easier.
Well, on hook grip, too, there's a genetic factor. Like, I was never able to go above 650, and that's because my thumbs would pop out. I have not small hands. I have fairly big hands, but it's mainly palm. So my fingers aren't that long. You have to have enough finger to be able to get a good grip on that.
Yeah.
And so that's why I gave up on it. It was like, I immediately went back to mixed grip and was over 700 again. So it's like, I'm not wasting my time doing this.
Yeah. I would think an uncharitable observer would just say, just get a stronger grip, dude, instead of trying to, 'cause it's kind of a loophole in a sense, isn't it? Like you're relying on your soft tissue. Like to me, it's almost like, does this damage the thumb joint at some point, or the tissue, or because you're almost
fancy good for it,
right?
Well, yeah, of course it does. But I mean, again, I'll go back to, does lifting up 800 pounds do your body good? Probably not. They're doing what it takes to win. The same thing could be is mixed grip cheating. No, it's just doing what you got to do. At a certain point, I don't think you're going to find anybody that can double overhand 900.
Right.
Without a hook. That's a lot. So
yeah,
at a certain point, you've got to use some kind of form of grip aid, meaning mixed grip, hook grip, something to move the loads that we're talking about need to be moved.
Makes sense. Yeah. Even just from a hypertrophy standpoint, when I deadlift, I much prefer a double overhand, sort of pronated kind of grip. It just makes I feel it in my upper back more than when I do a mixed grip or something like that, because not to offend our powerlifter crowd, but I don't really care how much I'm pulling off the ground. I want to build my upper back, and the double overhand just feels better, I guess. But by that thinking, though, I'll even do low rack pulls, not even straight all the way off the floor sometimes, because the deadlift is always a messy movement for bodybuilders, because what do you do? Is it leg work? Is it back work? Yes.
Yeah.
So one last bit. I mentioned earlier that we would touch on this at the end. So what about these accessory movements as a percent of clients' total workload, like off season, on season? Is it even seasonal? How do you approach that, Phil? The inclusion.
We definitely do more. Like the swing towards assistance work goes much greater in off season in what I do. So we're going to do a lot more of that, and I don't know, it's probably 25-75.
Okay, there you go.
And then as the season comes to an end, like the most thing we're doing is bench and squat and deadlifting really heavy. And when you're in that 90% range, there's not a lot left. And we're training to squat, bench, and deadlift. So that's where our time needs to be spent. We need to get real good at hitting that for singles. So of course we do. We do more of that than we do the assistance work. And we're also, as the intensity goes up and the meet gets closer, we're trying to walk that fine line between, what people don't realize is you're 4 weeks out, you're not progressing anymore. You're not getting stronger. We're in the realization phase. Yeah. We're trying to realize exactly how strong you are. So we're just getting very efficient and very good at those single moves. There's no amount of assistance work that I can do 4 weeks out that will make you literally stronger for that meet. It just doesn't happen that way. So we're just trying to make you as efficient as you can with what we've already built. So,
all right, now that begs the question: the accessory work, the intent is it hypertrophy or motor pattern? Some are more one than the other, I'm guessing.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yeah. It just depends. So it depends on the lifter and where they're at. So a lot of times assistance work is, especially around my gym, because we're not big on making weight classes. We're big on moving the most weight that we can. So it's usually, most of my lifters are usually, let's eat and train hard. So it's building, accessory work is geared towards building more mass. It's very bodybuilder-esque. It's about putting on soft tissue or muscle tissue. And that's mainly what it's about, but it's also addressing weaknesses, and usually it's around that 80% range in a main move that you can start seeing a weakness. I don't need to go to a max. I can start to see what's going to go wrong around there or even earlier.
Yeah.
So we're addressing that. We're trying to make that not a weakness anymore, and we're trying to create a new weakness by making that one a strength. So we're building, and a lot of times you can do that by just building tissue.
Bigger engine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I don't know, neural pattern? No, I don't think so. I mean, our neural work is done with the move and in the warm-ups, trying to do that main move correctly, and cueing.
Okay.
But, so it's strength and tissue is what we're trying to do.
Roger
addressing weaknesses and building a massive engine.
Yeah. You know, when you mentioned good mornings, which is something I never really did much of, actually, when I did, like, just 315 in the squat, you know, and you do more than 10 reps with that, your lower back starts to go. Like, if you want to know if your lower back's not up to snuff, for me and the guys that I used to train with, that's when that would happen. If you try to do higher rep squats with a medium weight or more, you don't see it with a couple of reps when you're not fatigued. But as you start to fatigue, you start to sag forward, you know, with like a spinal flexion, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's my lower back.
Well, I'm also, there's numerous reasons why I'm a big fan of good mornings because, your back strength and things like that, but there is going to be a time, and if you're a power lifter and you're serious about this, there's going to be a time you get out of position with a heavy load.
Yep.
And if you're able to good morning a great percentage of your squat, you're not in an issue. You're not in a problem. You've been there before. You know how to get back out of that.
You mean for injury?
So,
yeah, to prevent.
Well, and just making a lift. You know, if you accidentally shoot your hips up a little bit and your good morning is just shit, you're in trouble. If you're not, there's numerous videos of me where I'll shoot my hips and I slow down a lot, but I'll be like, I'm okay. I got it. And I'm just shifting and coming up.
Okay.
And I mean, I'll start good mornings very light with people. It's one of those moves that I think too many people go to too heavy too soon. But eventually we're going to work up the really, really heavy good mornings, 3s and 1s and things like that over with a new lifter. I'm talking over years. So there was a point in my career I did a good morning with a safety squat bar with 675 and touched my elbows to my knees and came back up.
Jesus.
So I knew if I ever get out of position in a squat, I'm all right. I'll be fine.
Yeah.
I can fight out of it, you know.
Power through it, yeah.
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 So.
All right, Mike, what about you? Percentage of accessory work, and is it seasonal and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think of it as in terms of more of a hierarchy, I guess, in terms of looking at programs, what are things you're going to prioritize. I get this from Frankie Ferries and Adam Glass. So very similar to Phil, like the first one is specific. If you're doing a powerlifting meet, obviously squat, bench, and deadlift. You know, how much specific, said principle, specific adaptation, imposed demand, how much of that specific work can I get in the program? Because that's going to be the fastest way to get them better at those, specific lifts. But you're going to reach a point where you can't do, 100% of your work there. And the percentage will vary a lot with lifters. I've had, one guy qualified for Raw Nationals, and he only really did 1 day of accessory stuff, and he was literally doing squat, bench, deadlift 4 days a week.
Wow.
But he was kind of a freak. I don't have many people that can do that and survive. They usually have joint issues and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Exactly, yeah.
So after that, then like we talked about accessory stuff, what are some common exercises you can put in? Your goal is to try to get, positive transfer. You're trying to increase your main lift, right? So RDLs to help deadlift, things of that nature. Once you've kind of maxed that out, then I look at contra-specific. Like Phil said, if your bench press is stalled out and we're doing a lot of specific work, we're doing a lot of accessory work, maybe it's your upper back that's the limiting factor. And I've taken some people who their bench press was stalled, and I just had them started doing upper back, like a ton of rows. They were doing some form of a row 4 to 5 days a week for 4 to 12 weeks, and very little bench press work. They went back and retested their bench press after a week, and their bench press went up. So sometimes it's the opposite of what you should be doing. And if that still doesn't work, then you're just looking at stuff that's novel, stuff that just may be different, things they may not have done for a while, who knows then? If it's just more work, maybe it's some hypertrophy, maybe it's some soft tissue stuff. But that's kind of the priority I look at in terms of programming.
Yeah, and I agree. And one thing that I think is worth mentioning is I've had this question asked to me quite a few times. Is like many of my, we'll call them, advanced or elite lifters. If you look at their programs, they look very simple compared to my beginning lifters. Like a beginning lifter, I'm going to have them do a lot more assistance stuff.
Yeah.
And my later lifters, it's like main move, accessory move, some ab work. And that's it.
Okay.
But the reason for that is if I have a new lifter, let's say I got a new high school kid that comes in, they don't have a weak point, they're weak.
Right.
My advanced lifters have a weak point. They have like 1 or 2 things we're addressing, and we address one of those at a time usually. So it's like, okay, you need to squat, do some good mornings or loaded carries, some ab work, you're done. You know, whereas the other guy, it's like, dude, you're 148 pounds and squat 225. You're fucking weak.
Yeah.
We're going to do all this shit.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
here's
all
your
weak.
laundry list. Let's get it done.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to build everything. So you don't have a weak point in that stage of life. You're just not strong. So their programs, earlier lifters, their programs look a lot more, I don't know, complicated, or just it's just bigger. They're doing more stuff. Whereas a later lifter, we can address assistance moves while we're squatting, just through cueing. You know,
Sure.
You're not
Yeah.
doing this, fix it. You know, so whereas the other people, it's just we have to just build that stuff. They can't do it. They just literally can't because they don't have the time under the bar. So we need to address lots and lots and lots of assistance work on newer lifters.
That's a fun way. Right.
Yeah, and then my advanced lifters, when we do that stuff is off season, and that's more of just like Mike was talking about, you can only squat so many times.
Ugh.
So like Brian, he got done in literally from 6 weeks, we just don't. We just do other stuff. It's like go in the gym with machines and have fun.
Yeah.
Let's get your joints not unhappy from squatting 900 pounds.
Right. Overuse.
Mm-hmm. So.
Do you find a lot of that's just a mental thing too? You know, sometimes you just got to get away from
it is
doing the
is.
same thing day in and day out too.
A lot of that is just a good break. It's just let's just go in,
Have fun.
and go in and have fun. Literally go in and have fun and train and not have a goal in mind. Let's just go get your pump on, bro. You know?
Yeah.
So it's a nice change of pace for a little while. It's relaxing because when you're working with serious lifters, literally, I mean, every bit of their daily energy is geared towards that. Like, okay, I'm squatting 900 this meet, and that's what they're thinking about all the time. So it's nice to take just a mental and physical break from that.
Yeah, I get
So.
it. Okay. All right. Well, I think that covers it. I know we've
Sweet.
talked about this sort of thing before, but it's fun to revisit, especially from different angles and whatnot. So,
Yep.
good stuff.
All right, guys.
Good stuff.
See
Talk
ya.
to you later.
All right. See you guys.
Hey listeners, have you seen the store at IronRadio.org? There are 3 halls in the store. One for Phil, one for Fortress, and one for myself, Dr. Lowry, and they're thematic. So you can go into our Halls of Iron store and choose based on your goal. If you need something to learn or read or something nutritional, you can look in my store, Lonnie's store. If you want something about injury prevention or competition, then take a look at Phil's Hall of Iron. And if you want something about motivation or daily training, Fortress's Hall has what you're looking for. There are some fun, heroic descriptors as you browse through the stores. We try to make it a little more fun than the average boring online store. And whether you're a novice lifter or someone more experienced, you can take heart that you're not wasting your time. The things that we put in each Hall of Iron are actually based on our own recommendations. Protein powders that we know to be good, knee sleeves, wraps of some kind, things that Fortress uses in his own training. The stuff you see, you know is good. This way you don't waste time. So check out the Iron Radio store at ironradio.org and let us know what you think on the forums, and certainly you can request products and we will screen them before they go in. So thanks for listening. Iron Radio is accepting donations. If you like what we do, the professors, the scientists, the bodybuilding show promoters, the athletes themselves in powerlifting and bodybuilding, please consider making a donation or maybe buying something from the ironradio.org store. We also are accepting supporting members. So for $4 a month, which is frankly less than the bank sneaks out of your account in fees, you can step up and support a form of sort of public radio for the bodybuilding and powerlifting and strength community. The Iron Radio podcast and all of the audio on ironradio.org is for informational purposes only. If you're interested in starting a diet or exercise program, it's important to check with your physician. Also seek the help of registered dietitians, athletic trainers, and qualified exercise physiologists in order to make the progress that you need.